listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies about... Ooh, I don't have the... I wanted to just make a weird noise and try to lead into the earnestness of doing something completely unique, but I couldn't.
Oh, no.
I'm too...
I'm kind of glad you couldn't.
How awful for both of us would it have been? You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies about... I can't believe you've never heard of Iron and Wine before.
Do you ever heard of this band called The Shins? let me put my headphones on your head, because that's a normal thing.
I think that actually might be the most offensive thing about this movie.
I think that might be just you, but
can you imagine?
No. I mean, I personally would not put someone else's over-the-ear headphones on my own ears.
I'm Andrea.
Oh, I'm Jodie.
We watched Garden State.
We watched Garden State. Oh, what a movie.
I'm going to make a quick disclaimer up top.
Yeah.
You and I have decided we both went into this trying to watch this movie with an open mind and heart.
Yes.
And I think for the most part we did succeed.
I think so too.
I think I will say flat out, I'm not going to shy away from any criticism that I have, and there is plenty, but
Sure.
I'm also not going to pretend like there aren't things to like about this movie.
Yeah.
Which seems to be, and now I feel like I'm acting like I'm better than anybody else who hates this movie.
We are.
but we are. No, but I think that seems to be what we've all done with anything that we're ashamed that we liked when we were younger.
Yep.
People are just hating this movie top to bottom, and I don't think that's fair. I'll start with that.
I have to agree. I mean, one of the first things I found when I was looking at sort of the critical response then and now was the aptly titled Vice article. It's the 10-year anniversary of realizing Garden State sucked. So we are not going to be doing that.
No, and I must say, I think that article is great. I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's got
funny.
a lot of good points. Dan Ozzie wrote it, and I'm such a fan of Dan Ozzie. I love him so much. If you care about music at all, go read Sellout, even if that genre, even if you don't really care about like punk, like rise of sort of the like start of what became the emo scene kind of.
Yeah.
If you don't care about any of that, that book is fantastic.
But it is a good article, and he does make good points. And I just think that we're not going to...
It's also that article's how old? When was that?
It's 10 years
2015.
old.
So I also think I hope that there's
2014 or 2015, yeah.
So yeah, so 8 years.
Mm-hmm. That's how
I
math
also
works.
hope that there's some pendulum swinging stuff happening where like that movie was so loved at first. And so it makes sense then because there were some things right out the gate not to love. And so it makes sense then that we've got to hate it a lot before we can just kind of settle in like Garden State is okay.
Yeah. And you know, like when I read, he's got some great lines in this article. He calls him the Zach Braff, the talking Q-tip from Scrubs.
I missed that.
It's great. And he talks about the triteness of the whole thing and like, you know, vapid privileged problems like swimming in Coldplay and being a struggling actor. Like he's got points. He's got points. But I think also you're right about the fact that like the embarrassment of how much so many of us really, really loved this movie and how much it meant to some of us. Like it kind of feels like reading your old journals and being like, oh yes. God, like, should I burn this or am I going to feel differently in 20 years when I read this? Am I going to like not hate myself as much?
Exactly.
Like,
he has a line in here about, he just mentions like putting it in your PS2, which is so specific. And it's so like I had sitting on top of my PS2. Oh boy, this is really like Garden State and Donnie Darko, the DVDs, because I just like they were my two where it like if I was doing anything in my room where I wasn't listening to music, I was watching one of those. I think it's also what was I was 19 in 2005. Like So this movie, I was a depressed, like I was a mentally ill 19-year-old in New Jersey when this movie came out. Like I was, who loved Scrubs. Like I was.
Yeah, you were the target audience.
There was no hope for me with this movie.
Yeah. I also just have to point out that Vice article links to a YouTube clip of the scene where she's introducing him to the Shins in...
Oh, okay, that's brutal. Go ahead.
But, wait for it. The clip, I don't know who posted the clip because it's not anything like some official site, but it's mistitled Garden State - the Shits scene instead of the Shins. And I just am like,
you really like that is a hard.
It's Dan Ozzie who posted it.
Is he doing a joke?
I think maybe. I don't know. But that's really funny.
It's also fun. I was thinking about this whole time what this movie would be like cut to a different soundtrack.
Wait. Hold on.
You gotta hear this one song. They'll change your life, I swear. Oh, I'm sorry. You have to.
I just have to see if this is the actual scene or if it's something that's been doctored.
Think you could maybe listen while you could?
Yeah. If it's like fart sounds, I'm gonna laugh and I'm gonna
I know, that's what I'm wondering. Yep. That's what it is.
Dan Ozzie.
That's what it is. It's
Dan Ozzie
was.
was. Oh no. I dreaded my heart of being like, if that's what that is, I'm gonna think it's funny and I'm gonna feel bad about it. I truly just
that was a journey that I just went on.
The levels of emotion that I just felt at knowing what was coming, hoping it wasn't.
Journey.
Being Dan Ozzie.
Oh gosh. Wow.
Jodie, your pure heart that you thought that was a typo.
I did. Well, I did until I saw who posted it.
Right.
And of course, Vice wouldn't probably let him like post a random link that had a misspelling in the title, but oh my god.
My goodness.
Okay,
yeah.
Wow. That was an adventure.
Yeah, well, when I was thinking about this movie being cut to a different soundtrack, that's not quite what I was. Okay. We've already derailed.
Yes.
Jodie, can you do me a favor?
Oh no.
Can you tell me what this movie's about?
I don't know if I can. Okay. I'm gonna try. Okay. So this is about girls who don't know how to sit in chairs. And creepy guys who shouldn't be dating women that are still in college. No. Okay. This movie is about a struggling actor in LA whose mom dies, and he has to go home to New Jersey for the funeral. He hasn't been home in, I think, 9 years.
My first issue, but we'll talk about that.
His dad is not happy about it. He comes home for the funeral, and at the actual burial, he runs into two high school friends, Mark and the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they invite him out, so he goes to a party. Does some, I almost said Molly at the time, does some ecstasy. And then he's having these headaches. Oh, see, this is already I'm already messing up. He's on a ton of psych medication, among other things. We'll talk about the medicine cabinet scene.
My God.
Yeah. Which he goes off cold turkey when he goes home. Which again, we'll talk about that. But
I wonder if he never actually went home. Do you think this whole movie happens inside his head in some sort of
Andrea? This is not supernatural. This is not a dream.
Is it possible the whole thing is a dream? Because
No, okay. It's not. Okay. So, yes. So, just to rewind, before he goes home, we see he's on all the psych meds. He doesn't take them with him. He goes cold turkey. He starts having these crazy headaches because you're not supposed to go cold turkey off of your medication. PSA. So
this whole episode could be us
PSA.
Talking about.
Please don't do this.
It's so crazy.
It's so bad for you. Oh my God. So, okay. Rewind. Struggling actor. Mom dies. On lots of meds. Goes home for the funeral. Goes off his meds cold turkey. Runs into high school friends. Goes to the neurologist to find out about these headaches he's having. Turns out he's fine. He's just over-medicated and did it a dumb way when he just stopped taking them. Meets, what's-her-face? Natalie Portman.
Sam.
What is her Sam. Oh, yes, right. She's a girl with a boy's name because she's quirky. And she's quirky. She's super quirky. She lies a lot.
It's just like a fun thing she does. She doesn't even know why she does it. It makes no sense. It's so crazy.
Silly. Yeah, she's just weird and quirky. So they spend a few days together. He's processing his mom dying. He's hanging out with his old friends. And then they kind of theoretically fall in love in a few days. We find out that his mom died by drowning in the bathtub because she was paraplegic. It's implied that it might have been just on purpose. Then we find out that he's the reason his mom is paraplegic, or, you know, it was an accident that he was involved in. When he was 9, he pushed her because he was mad, and she fell over the dishwasher with a broken latch and broke her neck. So then, this is so funny. The movie does get a little muddy here for me, even though I literally watched it yesterday. They then go on this adventure with Mark to like reclaim the necklace that his mom was going to be buried in, because Mark is a grave robber, which is a thing.
Grave robber.
Which is a thing that we just don't hate him for, apparently. Or at least the movie doesn't want us to hate him for, because he redeems himself in the end by this like series of hijinks that include like scamming a local hardware store and selling a nitrous tank. Like, okay.
He also says, when he gives the necklace back to him, he says the craziest thing. He's like, you didn't want it down there with her. It's better with you anyway. As if what he did was go through all this task to get it from her body in the graveyard. As if, like, it wasn't, you didn't, it's what you did in the first place wasn't noble.
No, it was theft.
Like, come on, Mark.
Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of, like, you know, like, preciousness or something around dead people, like, right. But I do think grave robbing is bad
generally. Yeah I do think one thing I noticed this time around was how casually grave robbing is treated. So he gets the necklace back. He's about to fly back to LA. He and Sam have fallen in love again in like 4 days. He has a meaningful conversation with his father where he says, like, you over-medicated me. Like, why won't you let me have feelings? He puts his hand on his chest in a kind of creepy way. And then when he tries to leave, Sam, of course, falls apart because her life has no meaning without him. Mm-hmm. I said I wasn't going to be mean.
I think we can be a little mean. I think especially when it comes to Sam and her characterization. I think it is totally okay to be mean there.
Okay, so she loses her shit because this man that she didn't know 4 days ago.
She is crying so much.
Yeah. You would think her mom died.
She didn't cry
this man that she didn't know.
When she brutally murdered her hamster. But this man she's known for 4 days.
Yeah. But he changes his mind. He gets off the plane, which famously is something you can't really do unless you're about to get arrested.
You can't just be like, the lady I met. You don't understand.
Yeah.
I'll be sad.
Yeah, I'd be so sad. This is post 9/11 too. Mm-hmm. They're not letting you off the plane.
No way.
But he goes and finds her. I
feel like especially at Newark. Although actually, now I'm sort of torn. Is it especially at Newark, or is it, if you're going to get away with that kind of like airport lawlessness anywhere, it's Newark?
Oh, Newark in the mid 2000s. You may have a point. But he gets off the plane and he basically is like, "You complete me," except not that.
But he might as well. I'm sorry. We're so close to the end. She is sobbing in a phone booth when he finds her. She's in a glass case of emotion, like Anchorman.
Oh, fuck, yeah. Okay, yeah, so she's in a glass case of emotion. He comes back and says that he loves her or something, and that they'll work it out. And there were so many platitudes in that final speech that I cannot possibly remember what he actually said. And then that's the movie. How did I do?
You kind of crushed that, honestly.
Well,
I think that was great. If
you let me be mean about it, it's easier.
Yeah. Well, that ending, I almost want to talk about the ending first so we can because it is.
Well, can we talk about it in the context of the text that you sent me within 5 minutes of starting the movie? Little behind the scenes here.
Tell me what I said. I don't remember.
Okay. So, the problem is there were a lot of texts that followed that, so I've got to find it.
I'll say while you're scrolling,
okay.
It's so funny because he gives her that shithead speech where he's going to get on the plane and he goes on and on. He's like, it's not an ending, it's an ellipsis, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
and then 5 minutes later, he's like, remember that blah, blah, blah stuff I said, which was only 5 minutes ago? And she's like, the ellipsis? And she's like, yeah, Natalie, the ellipsis. Like,
oh my God.
It was 5 minutes ago and it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad. Not to sort of spoil my thesis here at the very beginning of our podcast, but I think the reason that we all decided we hated this movie is because it shows how the most cringy version of ourselves to ourselves. Like the people we were when we were writing in our journals about our first love. Like, it's
and
just
I
so
also
cringy.
think there's part of it that's like, I'm embarrassed for Zach Braff for being so earnest on screen.
Yeah. The
and
earnestness is painful.
It's not really up to us to be embarrassed for this rich white man, but I can't help it.
But we're embarrassed for ourselves as well.
Right.
Andrea.
Yeah, it's like not echo chamber, but it's like two mirrors facing each other and it just goes on and on forever,
Yes. So what you said in the text to me was, here's my prediction 5 minutes in. I'm going to think this movie could have been good even now if they cut the love story.
Oh, yeah.
Which actually
I'm
is
so
not
right.
a terrible point.
I'm so right.
There's a few other things I would think need to be altered for it to actually be a good movie, but I think that would be a great start.
It is. But then who's going to save Zach Braff if not Natalie
wait, here's
Portman?
an idea. Wait, I have a thought. What if he's a fucking adult and saves himself?
What if this movie is him going home to find a good therapist and a good psychiatrist who isn't his fucking
father.
dad? Although I did read that Zach Braff's both of his parents and one of his step-parents were psychologists, and he had a step-parent who was a therapist, which is like, Lord. No wonder he wrote Garden
this
State.
Movie. Yeah.
Like, I think that's all you need to know. Can you imagine what a nightmare that must have been?
Oh my God. I mean, yeah.
I mean, so much of this movie comes from
his life.
Yeah. Like, even down to the, Vietnamese restaurant in the beginning, which I think I also said to you, this whole podcast could be about that scene, because it is, everything about it is wild. And I have a lot to tell you about it. Actually, I only have one thing to tell you. The dude in that scene with the women who's being such a pain in the ass, they all are, he's the man who financed this movie. So that's why he's in this movie. You know what I mean?
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, no, what you said was we could do an entire episode on her. She's fighting for her life in that scene.
She's working so hard.
She really is.
Bamboo. Whatever. There are so many crazy line deliveries by the not the side characters in this movie that are I didn't realize how much of this movie was still in my brain because of those people.
Yeah. I didn't realize how much of this movie was not in my brain anymore. How much of it, how many plot points were fully gone from my brain.
People deal with trauma in different ways.
Yeah.
I've been ruminating for 20 years.
For me, this movie was about Natalie Portman being quirky and killing hamsters and a big house with no furniture. I remembered the set pieces.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Which does make sense. Yeah, because that was a lot of what he was focused on, the quarry and all that. But yeah, there were a lot of pretty significant details I had blocked out.
This is another movie. I think one of the reasons I was interested in this being the movie we watched this week is to hold it up against another movie by a very Jersey. That's the other thing about Zach Braff. He is very Jersey. Like, this movie is clearly made by somebody who knows this state. Like, that,
you know
I
what
will
else,
give
though?
him.
Okay, he is very Jersey. He's a very specific kind of Jersey.
Rich.
Yes.
Rich.
Child of psychologists
in South Orange.
And
he went to Maplewood. Yeah.
Yeah. Currently referred to as like the new Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that, like, that's also a really important context when I say he is. This movie was
also
filmed
Jersey.
Yeah, totally. This movie was filmed almost entirely on location. What I was saying was holding Zach Braff as a filmmaker and this movie up against Jeremy Jasper and Patty Cakes, which is so interesting because we talk about a lot, or at least we have talked about, how New Jersey has these pockets. Like, how far apart is, we could find out. Hold on. How far apart is, so the mansion that his friend bought is actually Crocker Mansion, which has a really interesting, in I think Hillsborough, which has a really interesting, it's like a registered historical landmark.
Oh, it's in Mawa. Yeah.
And so how close is that to the south, to the overpass?
Okay, overpass. So here, this is what I wanted to say when you started this part of the conversation. I think last week I talked about I've talked about New Jersey so much recently. I don't know what's happening. The further I get from this state, the more I talk about it. And the more annoying I am about it. But so, Mawa is where my mom lived when she was a kid. The town that I grew up in, Saddlebrook, is, I would say, no more than 20-30 minutes from Mawa. Maybe 30.
29 minutes from Crocker Mansion to Saddlebrook Mall.
Look at me.
You nailed it.
I nailed it. So, and the point I wanted to make, which nobody cares about but me, is that I grew up in Saddlebrook until I was 13, right? So Jeremy Jasper's New Jersey was my New Jersey until I was 13. Then I moved to Glen Rock, which is the town next to Ridgewood, which is the very wealthy town my mom grew up in. Glen Rock is Ridgewood adjacent. It is also very wealthy, but it is just not as wealthy as the mansions and the like giant houses that start happening when you get to Ridgewood, Hohokus, Franklin Lakes, Mawa. I just went up Route 17 in my head. So this is the world that I grew up in. That dichotomy between the overpass and the adult store that's right next to it that, you know, was on my way to school versus the Crocker Mansion and the town my mom grew up in.
Totally.
This is literally the two poles of like my growing up in North Jersey specifically. So yeah, of course the Crocker Mansion's in fucking
and we
Wawa.
see it in this movie so much because
they drive through what looks like Patterson at one point, or was probably supposed to be like a Patterson,
right? Well,
you know?
and
Newark,
yeah, exactly. And Andrew's house and is, you know, he's got at least one medical professional parent, and the Crocker Mansion. But then we go to Mark's house, and Mark's house looks like straight out of Patty Cakes, you know.
Yeah,
and Natalie's house, or Sam's house too.
Yeah, and those two, it's so interesting. It's a terrible word for this, but it is interesting to me how there's like this spectrum, because it's not quite the location to me of Patty Cakes. It's like adjacent. Yeah. It's like just a little bit better, you know, because I don't think that Zach Braff grew up with people who lived in places like Lodi. Like, I just don't. Yeah. And it's not that Lodi is a bad place at all. It's just a different world.
Right. But I grew up with kids who grew up like Andrew did, and I grew up much more like Mark and Sam.
With the raccoons.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, when I lived with a raccoon, I lived in an area that you were more likely. Raccoon? I only had one. Thank you.
Okay.
But man, we really could get into so much of this, because you're right that like the Patty Cakes upbringing is not the same as the Sam and Mark upbringing, and it's obviously not the same as Andrew's upbringing.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the list of locations that this movie was filmed at reads like what we're talking about. Like, hold on, let me see if I can find it.
Well,
again.
I get the impression that Zach Braff is aware of all this. It's not.
Yeah, I think so.
Like,
yeah, he filmed in South Orange in his hometown. Wallington, Cranford, Mahwah, Livingston, Newark, and New York City. So like it is that sort of there's like an interesting map of it that goes from like the really fancy parts of New Jersey to the much less wealthy areas.
There's an interesting bit of, well, the bit of trivia isn't really interesting, but it's the thing you read. Every like piece of Garden State trivia or whatever that I read mentioned the fact that in that swimming pool scene, it's really, really foggy. And that wasn't like added after the fact. It was, he chose that location with the assumption that it would be clear, because apparently from that pool, you can see the Manhattan skyline.
Of course
Right.
you can.
Right.
Of course.
And
you
it
can.
has that whole scene about home and leaving and how you can't return and all of that. And that against the Manhattan skyline, which we talked about at length last week, is so significant. And it made me be like, oh, he really was. Because like I have said, we talked about this movie very, very briefly on New Jersey is the World. And I said I don't really think of it as a Jersey movie, and I take that back now watching it at this age. When I was younger, I was too focused on the love story question mark, I guess, and the deep emotional trauma that he's working through, whatever. It is a Jersey movie, very much. But I had always thought Garden State was a weird title for it, and maybe that's what I was responding to. But knowing that that was in his head when he was making this movie and that he had intended for that scene to be there is like, it's just such a Jersey experience.
Well, and I think the reason that to me, I didn't think of it as, and it still doesn't feel to me as Jersey of a movie as Patty Cakes, for example, is because it is not the Jersey that I was a part of for most of my life.
Right.
It was when I got to high school and I went to Glenrock High School and I started hanging out in Ridgewood because that's where I worked. I met a bunch of kids that lived in giant houses with no parents. Right? Whose parents would go to Europe for 2 weeks and the teens would take over and make a mess of these mansions. And like, that was an experience I had when I was in high school, but it still felt super foreign to me. So I think like, to me, Zach Braff's Garden State is like what I imagine the lives of like the people I knew from like Ridgewood and places like that was actually like, you know, but it was still pretty foreign.
Right. Yeah, totally.
I just want to point out, so you asked me how far Saddlebrook was from the mansion in this movie, and we said 20 minutes. I also want to point out that Newark is only 40 minutes from Mahwah. Like, that is so close.
It's in Newark where we see Method Man, which I quite like.
I mean, this movie does have kind of an incredible cast that I had forgotten about. Jean Smart as Mark's mom is great.
She's so good.
That's Peter Sarsgaard. Like,
I love Peter Sarsgaard.
I think he's part of the reason we don't hate him, even though he's a grave robber, just because he's Peter Sarsgaard.
Yeah, he's not just a grave robber too. He's like,
he's a scammer. He also is like chasing after women that he's too old to be chasing after.
Yeah. We're supposed to think he's noble because when Zach offers him money, or he even says, which I think is a good point, he's like, or just ask Jesse or whoever. I forget which one is which, but I think Jesse is the silent Velcro inventor, which is really funny.
I've forgotten completely about that. It's a lovely note.
He says, no, I don't borrow money from anybody. I don't take money from anybody. And I believe that. He has, this is a very, I can't say Jersey thing, but it's a very this class of person
it's
thing.
It's a bro thing.
It's like a bro, it's like a suburban bro thing of like,
code.
I'm living at home with my mom. I'm running return like merchandise scams at local stores, but I think that it is dishonorable to borrow money. I will, and we're supposed to think that that's like a redeemable quality in him, that we're like,
this movie looks at Mark with much more respect than I can.
Yeah.
Like,
totally.
I can't. Not only is he a scammer, a grave robber, hitting on girls he's too old for, he also is, like, annoyed with his mom for wanting him to, like, have a life and, like, do something other than sit on the couch and smoke weed and, like, you know, rob graves. Like,
he says, like, I'm 26, what's... Which, in 2005, is, like, because I know now we talk about the, like... there's like an extended adolescence kind of thing happening, and how we need to be a little more sympathetic and empathetic, I think, in our generations.
And also capitalism has set up this generation to fail.
Exactly. So I think all of that is true, but he, just the way he's like, oh, I'm 26, what's the rush? It's like, well, I'm sure your mom doesn't have health insurance, but even if she did, this would be your last year, buddy. So, like, there's a little bit of a rush.
Nope. Remember
that's
last week,
before
pre-2008.
That's right.
Pre-Obamacare.
So
like, I mean, you know, now that I am closer to Jean Smart's age than I am to the age I was when this movie came out.
Horrifying to think about, isn't it?
I know. But now that I am closer to the age of someone who could have a child that in their 20s, like, get the fuck off her couch.
Yeah. Yeah.
She wants to fuck the kid from medieval times, and you're in the way.
And you need to let her.
And
like,
you need to go
do
something, like, get your own shitty apartment in fucking, you know, wherever.
Uh-huh.
You know,
So
I was trying to think of a town that a person could afford an apartment in New Jersey at 26, and I couldn't come up with one.
Nope.
This is maybe proving his point. But, yeah, like, get off her fucking couch and let her have sex with the knight. Like... What's wrong with you?
I said that this episode could just be us talking about how they handle mental health and Andrew's medication. It could also be just about the scene at the kitchen table. Or not even the kitchen table. There are parts of this movie that hold up, and the reveal of that fucking knight with a gallon of milk when he wakes up on the sofa is so funny.
And I had completely forgotten it was Jim Parsons.
I know.
Who, again, appears in, apparently, I haven't seen the two other movies that he's written and directed. I kind of want to now just to compare, but I
almost put one on yesterday. In like a weird kind of like, I don't even know what the impulse is, but I am interested.
So
I think I want to see that he's grown and matured a little bit. I think that's what I want.
We'll see. But yeah, either his second or third movie, Jim Parsons is also in. So I think it was funny to see him in his... all his armor,
just looking like an absolute baby. I know that medieval times exist in other places, but I think it started here, and
it's so iconic.
Like, medieval times just is very New Jersey.
Yeah.
Did they finally unionize?
They were trying to. I don't know if they did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Geth has a whole bit about medieval times in his Jersey special, like the silliness of being a fake knight, you know, for your job.
That's Taylor ham, egg, and cheese. I think it's still on Spotify, right?
I know. I tried to find it recently and it wasn't on Spotify anymore. I don't know if it's back, but it wasn't when I looked. I had to find it on like YouTube or something. Okay. I was trying to share one of the bits with somebody. But yeah.
And we also, one of our New Jersey's World live shows was, we divided the audience up like medieval times and then had a bunch of medieval times inspired games.
I'm so mad I missed that one.
It's just very much in our DNA.
Yeah.
And so that is such a lovely little touch.
Yeah. No, the cast in this movie is great. The woman that is singing the song we talked about at his mom's funeral, singing 3 Times a Lady.
Oh my god, she's perfect.
Perfect.
She's so good. I know so many of her. I told you, somebody, a distant relative, at least this person was, I think she is her his dad's sister, because she's credited as aunt, but she says, when I met your mother.
Right.
So I think that's his, but
yeah, that's Jackie Hoffman. She's been working obviously for a very long time. She's currently been in Only Murders in the Building.
Oh.
She was also in Birdman, Glass Onion, Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies.
She's one of those who
Maisel.
probably, yeah.
She's been working forever and ever and ever.
And I grew up with 10 of her. I think
I
told you at my Pub-Up's funeral, some random woman who was like married into our family sang Amazing Grace and multiple verses of it, and not well. Multiple verses. And it's just
great.
Like, you just have to let these people do their thing. When she says the little passive aggressive bit where she's like making him try the shirt on at his mother's funeral, and she says like, just in case it doesn't fit and I need to change it before you leave us again for 9 years.
9 years.
Oh,
yep.
Oh, I felt that one.
She was also a voice on Doug, apparently.
But she's fantastic. It is one of the scenes that we loved at the time that I know is why one of the reasons this movie is shamed now is she makes him try the shirt on, and it is it's literally the leftover material from when they redid the bathroom.
It's so Wes Anderson.
It's so painful. Wes Anderson, but it's also like, and it's so like, I said last week too, this is somebody who went to film school, like trying to make a capital M movie. And this the same with Garden State. And this is a good example of that. But it's funny and it works, and it also does a little bit of that, like he's blending in with the background, but it also just is like a funny thing to see. So like
you couldn't do it seriously at all. You're like, it's blending in with the background.
Well, because I know that's like part of it. There's so much stuff like that.
It's the cringe, right? It's the sincerity of it.
Yeah,
like he's so going straight at all of these cliches and tropes with like a sincere heart. And it's hard to watch.
It's the sincerity of it, plus the like, again, film schoolness of some of it. And I know I have no right to be, and I'm actually not saying that to judge. I think it's like, I bet that it's really hard to make a movie, and so like that he's trying to do anything. But I do know those scenes. There's also the one at the very beginning when he walks through the bathroom and all of the sensors go off, which is just a cool visual. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Like, because I think probably you might like, I'm trying to think of how you would explain what's going on there with some sort of like symbolic meaning, and there just isn't, because
you could try to stretch to make one, but it's tough.
Because in fact, if you
I'm sure he has one though.
Well, that's what I wonder, if he does, or if he's just like, that's a cool visual. Because if anything,
he's so sincere. There's got to be some sort of like,
but he should be, if anything, so disconnected that he can't set them off. That scene then should be him not being able to wash his hands, and instead everything is reacting to him in that scene.
Yeah,
maybe it's
that would
because
make more sense.
He's still so full of drugs that his like cells are vibrating off of his body, because that medicine cabinet is.
Are we talking about that now? Is that what we're doing?
I think, Jodie.
Let's get into it. Okay.
Did you write them down? I didn't write them down, but it is.
I wrote some of them down.
It's so funny. It's so funny.
I wrote some of them down.
A lot of it is like, it's Xanax, Percocet.
Okay. What I wrote down is Zoloft, doxycycline, Percocet, Valium, Vicodin, hydrocodone. There were a couple more that you texted me.
Methacarb, which I think is a non-narcotic muscle relaxer. There are a couple that are really funny. Like the doxycycline.
That's funny to me.
It's just an antibiotic.
Yeah. It's like what they give you when you get bitten by a tick.
Yeah. Methacarb, I think, is a non-narcotic muscle relaxer. Like, I don't think that one's a big deal. Like, I think
a lot of them are pain. Percocet, hydrocodone.
Well, a lot, and you can get a buzz from them, so that's fine.
Yeah, if you take too much, but
it's hold on. Methacarbamol is essentially acting skeletal muscle relaxant, approved for the treatment of acute musculoskeletal pain. It's like that's what it's for. This is why I know what it is. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to say why. It has nothing to do with me, and I don't want to violate HIPAA laws. It's just kidding. I'm not a medical professional. It wouldn't be a HIPAA violation, but. It's for muscle spasms. It's not even for pain, really.
And there's of course there's also lithium in there, which we should
and meclizine, which is an anti-nausea medication I take like once a week. Like it's like, okay. I just think it's like maybe some of that. And there's
repeats too, right? So the visual, for people who haven't watched this movie in a while or have never seen it, the visual is he opens the medicine cabinet. He opens the medicine. I'm in the Midwest. He opens the medicine cabinet, And it's all pills. Every shelf is full. It's all this like orderly grid of pill bottles.
That's the only thing in there.
Yeah. And so there's repeats, right? Like there's multiple bottles of each thing in order to fill the medicine cabinet.
Which also doesn't really make sense unless the implication is that he hasn't been taking his medicine.
That he's hoarding it illegally. And like, but all of the meds have his name on them.
Yeah, none of that makes sense.
No, none of it makes sense.
Or maybe he just doesn't throw his bottles out, but that also doesn't...
He's holding on to them for a later art project when he gets to graduate school for his MFA. I don't know where I got that idea from. That's definitely not a thing a number of people have done. But I thought of that as that one image I thought of as just such a little bit of a weird note, because it's definitely it's for the visual, right? It's not actually realistic at all.
They weren't assuming anybody was going to pause it and look and wonder why this 26-year-old man is on anti-nausea medication and a heavy-duty antibiotic.
Doxy made me so sick.
Yeah, doxycycline is like a heavy-duty.
Sun.
Yeah.
He lives in LA. Like, it's like literally I was on doxycycline for getting a tick bite when I was... Also... Yeah, you can't be outside.
One of my favorite foods is banh mi, which is Vietnamese and is served...
On bread?
On bread.
Okay, then I'm going to read this now. So, on the IMDb for this movie...
A fun fact?
I do. In the Did You Know section of IMDb, under goofs, is a person who wrote...
They fucked up.
In the restaurant scene near the beginning, when the snotty customer asks for bread, Andrew Largeman replies they have none and explains this is because this is a Vietnamese restaurant. In fact, because of the French colonization of Vietnam in the mid-19th century, French baguettes are a common staple in Vietnamese cuisine, and any good Vietnamese restaurant would most likely have them in their kitchen.
And Zach Braff apparently worked at a Vietnamese restaurant.
That probably
he knows
had bread.
They have bread.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been waiting to throw that fact in, and you just gave me the opening.
So funny.
Thank you so much.
I love a good banh mi.
Yeah, seriously.
Come on, Zach Braff.
I could again.
Okay, just talk about that.
Not to go too deep here, but I will also say that banh mi wasn't as big of a white person trend in 2005 as it is now.
But I would think of Vietnamese restaurant.
Yeah,
have you ever been to one that had
bread?
Yeah, like. Yeah. I said, have you ever been to one? I was going to say that didn't have banh mi. I wasn't. Have you ever been? That wasn't.
Have you ever been to a? Yes,
God.
I have. Yeah. So okay. So let's talk. Should we do the mental illness hour now?
Yeah, and then remind me that I want to talk about his gas station experience.
Okay. Do you want to get to that first, or do you want to hold on to it?
What do you think is being implied there? I thought it was. This is what I remembered about if you asked me before today, or before yesterday, I guess, when I hadn't seen this movie in a very long time, what are the most Jersey moments in this movie? I would have said the medieval times night, and the scene where Large comes home to New Jersey and forgets, because he doesn't have to pump his own gas in Jersey because we're civilized people, that they haven't yet put the nozzle back on the pump, and he drove away. But that happens in LA. So he is pumping his own gas.
Right.
So how did that happen?
The implication is he doesn't know how to pump his own gas.
But he hasn't been back to New Jersey in 9 years. He didn't even have a license when he left.
Yeah, that's a solid point.
He has never lived in a state where he's had to pump his own gas.
Okay, so in addition to the bread thing, this also, and the pill thing.
Yeah, this whole beginning is just full of holes that do not, listeners, do not get resolved. Zach Braff, explain yourself.
Yes. Tell us what you meant by the gas pump.
Is it that he's...
That's clearly the biggest problem with the movie.
It's obviously he's so distracted because he's on a heavy-duty antibiotic and...
his anti-nausea meds haven't
Exactly. He's so distracted, he just... Yeah. You just wouldn't, because...
you would never drive away with the pump in the car.
Yeah. Unless you were somebody who wasn't used to just sitting in your car while someone else pumps your gas.
Right.
Then you might.
Right. Which is not the case here.
Right. Though that would be the fault of the gas attendant for either giving you your card back before he was done or taking your cash before he was done.
Yes.
Or she or they.
Right. Yes. Although in New Jersey,
yeah.
Have you ever had anyone other than an old man pump your gas?
Well, or a 17-year-old boy.
Sure,
very occasionally at a Wawa.
Okay.
But that's it.
Yeah. Well, that's
Which
a more
you don't know
modern
anything
experience of New Jersey than I've had.
Yeah. And also, as someone from North Jersey, you wouldn't know anything about it.
No. We've had Krausers and 7-Eleven. So, okay, should we talk about the mental illness part of this? Because this could be a short discussion or a long one, depending on how we want to deal with it. But first off, please don't just stop taking your psychiatric medication cold turkey.
It's not even just because he stops taking it and he starts complaining about the headaches. And I don't think we're meant to make that connection that that's what's going on.
But anyone who has stopped taking a psychiatric medication knows that there's something called brain zaps that feels like lightning is stabbing you in the brain.
And it's
when
like
you go off of a medication too fast or at all.
And the lesson we're supposed to get from this is because if he is taking all of those drugs, including the muscle, the anti-muscle spasm
and the hydrocodone.
But if he is actually taking all of those drugs, he is certainly over-medicated.
Yes.
Correct. Yes. But the resolution at the end of this movie being like, oh, I should just be on no drugs because it's better to feel than not. The options aren't you're so medicated that you can't feel and experience and engage with reality.
And can't cry, as is a big thing in the movie. Right.
Right. Or no drugs and that fixes you.
Yeah. No, there is a black and whiteness to this discussion, whatever, representation of psych meds that is really irresponsible.
Well, and I don't think that I think there's part of me that thinks the implication is supposed to be Andrew is not actually mentally ill in the first place and his dad put him on all these drugs. But he does have his mom clearly suffered from depression because he says one of the reasons he was so frustrated with her is she was sad all the time, which is unfair but realistic for a child.
Sure.
Right? Anybody who's had a parent who suffered from mental illness, like that's a real feeling. Yeah. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And of course, it is, I think, heavily implied that drowning wasn't accidental.
Right.
Right. So I just think the likelihood of it actually being Andrew was a troubled kid because he grew up in a troubled house and also suffers from his own, mental health issues is probably the case, right?
Yes, I think so. If what we're supposed to assume is that he was never mentally ill and he was over-medicated by a father who was terrified that the kid was going to blame himself, like, you still shouldn't stop taking your fucking medication randomly with no observation by a doctor. I mean, I cannot look at...
I mean, the jet lag alone is enough to mess you up,
But see, like, part of the thing is... Okay, I'm going to get into can we separate the art from the artist for a second? Because I think we can and should, but in this case, Zach Braff is so determined to make art about himself.
Oh my God, yeah.
In this movie and in the next one, the protagonist is Zach Braff. Like, it just is. And so, and he has talked about the fact that
literally his high school, he worked at a Vietnamese restaurant,
it's so autobiographical.
He even talks about
well, that's what I was about to say. Yeah. He talks about how he has OCD or had it when he was younger and how, he was mentally ill. He was depressed when he wrote this movie. And so I think that regardless of what we're supposed to think Andrew is going through in this movie, it's a semi to very autobiographical story about someone who has publicly said that they were mentally ill when they wrote it. So, I don't think that, I don't think anyone that's watched this movie would say that Andrew's character was not mentally ill in some way. Also, he was, medicated at 9 with lithium. Those things can both be true, you know? Yeah. I also think
that Ian Holmes should have had his license revoked.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you should
it's
not
so
be
unethical to be to your own child.
I mean, it's horrifying. I mean, and I think that's why in the movie at the time I watched it in the beginning, I was able to just kind of be like, well, yeah, like his dad did this to him and he stopped doing it and now he's fine, you know, like, but that's way too simplistic. But I also want to bring up the fact, and I probably shouldn't because I don't have like all the citations in front of me. But there was a time period in the early 2000s where there was a rash of overprescription of antipsychotics for bipolar disorder that has been described in medical literature since then.
Right.
Like there was a thing going around at this time about how heavy duty bipolar medications and young people being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and bipolar 2 and all of this stuff at a rate that was strange.
Right.
You know, and it was one of those like chicken or the egg thing. Like now with ADHD, suddenly, you know, all these women in their 30s and 40s are being diagnosed with ADHD. And it's like, well, did they always have it? Yes, in this case, probably. But also like, why now? And that was happening with bipolar disorder and with lithium and other more modern antipsychotics being prescribed to children.
Totally.
So he is actually, now looking back at it, it's hard to, you know, if you weren't aware of that conversation at the time, it's kind of maybe not on the radar, but he's kind of weirdly in conversation with something that was happening in psychiatry at the time, where there was a lot of conversation about like, should we be doing this? Should we be prescribing these heavy medications to young people before their brains have had a chance to fully form? So yeah, all that to say, there was a larger conversation happening about this at the time that I think he is either intentionally or unintentionally tapping into. And it's so specific, I can't imagine it's fully unintentional.
Right. And especially knowing that both of his parents were psychiatrists and
that he had OCD or has OCD. Yeah, exactly. There's also, since we're on the like mental illness topic, I think we also should talk a little bit about this movie from a disability perspective, because it's got some issues.
Oof.
I mean, there's the obvious one, which is the fact that the R word is said like 1,000 times in this movie.
And that's the joke. The joke is that they're saying that word.
Yeah. And it's also the only time, this was the thing that was like really uncomfortable for me, where I believed Natalie Portman's Jersey accent. And I think it's because that word was so thrown around constantly.
You know exactly what that word sounds like in a Jersey accent.
I do, unfortunately.
Natalie,
go ahead.
I know that you've already introduced what this little segment will be about. I did not remember her having that fucking baby voice.
Oh my God.
Natalie Portman, I've seen her in other things. She does not have that baby voice, right?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It is
when she starts talking to him also, he should have called the cops when she started talking to him. I'm sorry. I never in a million years, do not approach me like that. But it is.
Do not approach Andrea, people.
Her voice is, I truly couldn't believe the voice she's using in this movie. I know. She's a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is so gross. She dresses like a toddler. She sounds like a baby.
Yep.
And like, we can get into the manic pixie dream girl of it all if we want to. I don't even know that we really need to, because it's such a well-worn trope at this point. Though her character is challenging for a lot of reasons. But it is, I was saying to you before we even started recording, that's a term that we didn't even have in our vocabulary until shortly after this movie came out, in part because of this movie. Most the like person who wrote the original article with that term, though,
it's in reference to a different movie.
Yeah, we use that phrase as if it's just always been in our vocabulary, but somebody coined it. Nathan Rabin wrote an essay in 2007 about Elizabethtown, which is a movie I don't think many of us care about, and I don't even think Kirsten Dunst in that movie is the most offensive version of the manic pixie dream girl. I think probably it's like Natalie Portman or what's her face from Scott Pilgrim or Zooey Deschanel. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but
I also just, while we're talking about this, want to quote quickly from the Vice article, because this is one of the issues that, is this Dan Ozzi's article that we were talking about? Yeah, that he has a problem with. And so the way that he says it is, for the male viewers who had a predatory perversion for a questionably aged, borderline autistic jailbait, there was the film's male fantasy projection canvas, Natalie Portman. She was annoying and infantile with an arsenal of red flags, like the fact that her entire backyard was a cemetery for all the pets she'd killed with her gross negligence. So, yeah. There's that. I think that frames it pretty succinctly.
And I like Natalie Portman. She is not likable in this movie. And it's like, and it is such, he just so perfectly, there's that scene in the bathtub where she's like, what are you feeling now, after he manages to cry one tear? And he says, safe. When I'm with you, I feel safe, like I'm home. Bitch, you have known her for 3 days at this point. Yep. Like, that is crazy. But in this article, he says, Dunst embodies a character type I like to call the manic pixie dream girl, and then in parentheses, see Natalie Portman in Garden State for another prime example. The manic pixie dream girl exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries. Good luck in the infinite abyss. And adventures. The manic pixie dream girl is an all or nothing proposition. I'm going to just read the last little bit of this paragraph. Audiences either want to marry her instantly, despite the manic pixie dream girl being, a fictional character, or they want to commit grievous bodily harm against them and their immediate family. As for me, well, let's just say I'm not going to propose Dunst's psychotically chipper waitress in the sky anytime soon. So,
and yet, as a young woman during this time, I feel like I identified in some way as a manic pixie dream girl, like, or wanted to be seen as that.
Well, I think here's what I think is maybe like rooted in reality is the idea of a man putting all of his like preconceived ideas of what a specific woman should be to him and for him on a woman, and like not giving her the space to be who she needs to be. But then, and I think that is something that exists in real life, but her then manifesting as that kind of person to perfectly complement what he's, is expecting and needs her to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think the positive thing about the manic pixie dream girl, how am I going to spin this, is the fact that it glorified the weird kid a little bit.
That's true.
And having been a weird kid, I feel like the only positive thing I can think of from that depiction was that, like, in a way, I don't know if I can actually pull this off, but
I have faith in you.
It kind of, I can't believe I'm going to say the sentence. Can I say this sentence? I don't know if I can. I want to say it made mental illness kind of cute. Because I know she's not mentally ill in this movie, but she could be.
Well, she murders her pets. So.
Right. She's not mentally ill. So I don't know. I think that there's a reason that a number of girls that I grew up with didn't see this as problematic for a long time until we became adult women and we're like, oh wait, that's all we were about to be or allowed to be.
The like generous reading of a Natalie Portman character is she's interesting, she has a personality, she has characteristics that aren't dependent on the man in a way, like she's a liar and has epilepsy.
And can't sit in chairs.
Yeah. Bisexual representation, thank you. Love to see it.
Yeah.
But, so I can see why, again,
I'm not defending the manic pixie dream girl trope at all. I'm just saying that,
she's literally the first or second of them.
Yeah.
So we don't have to give Zach Braff slack for writing her, but I think we have to give Sam a little slack for existing. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's kind of, and I think it's okay to give ourselves slack for identifying with her before we were fully formed enough as thinkers and people to understand the problems with it.
Exactly.
You know, like, I think at the time I did not see Natalie Portman in that movie as a problem.
No. Definitely not. I loved her, it is hard to watch that and know that now. And it is why we all have to hate this movie so vociferously, because if we don't, then
because we hate ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to point out this movie was very well received at the time. Again, I need to just mention that like all this hatred that has come for it, it was a Critics' Choice nominee for Best Soundtrack. It was a Sundance pick. Like, you know.
Yeah, I think it was like funded for $2.5 million and bought up for $5 million. So like.
And it made like 14 times what it was made for. Like, it did really fucking well. And I don't know that we should get into the soundtrack just yet, because I think that's going to be a bit of a conversation.
Yeah,
but the soundtrack is obviously extremely notable.
Yeah, for sure. Like there is a lot to like about this movie still. I didn't have a bad time watching it. I think I told you it felt like exercise to watch this movie. I feel like I built muscle watching it because there is a lot to like, and there is also a lot that you really have to like just muscle through.
Well, and on that, I just want to finish up what my thought about the disability.
Right.
Because I've kind of got distracted, but I actually found a review of this in the Disability Studies Quarterly from that time.
Interesting.
And it brought up a few things that I hadn't even really considered. Like, the obvious parts of this when I think about it in that through that lens is the prolific use of the R word, which at the time, unfortunately, was quite normal. Not good, but normal.
But he uses it as a joke, which means he knows that we shouldn't be throwing it around like that. There's like a little bit of, we're like right on the...
And there's also the fact that there's like a blind person service dog that just leaves its owner to go hump his leg, which is not a thing that would happen with a service dog that was trained. Like,
no.
But the other thing that this article or this review brought up that I hadn't even really put much thought into is the fact that disability is, or, you know, life-changing disability is only seen as sad in this movie. It is a depressive, like his mom being a paraplegic, it is her only quality. It is her tragic backstory. And Natalie Portman's character has epilepsy, and it ruins her skating career, and therefore, like, and now she has to live at home. Like, there's no nuance whatsoever to the way that disability is portrayed in this movie.
It's funny, the stuff about her epilepsy is, there's that. You're so right that, like, and we see the potential she had that was lost. But it's also, he picked a disability for her that you can't see. The only indication we have of it is when she puts the helmet on, which is done as a joke. It's not like, I mean,
in some ways, he does give her more dimension. Like, she's not just a disabled character. It's like it's a footnote, which is a good thing.
Right, yeah.
But the way that the mom is treated is a whole other problem.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to quote from this real quick because I think it's important to put voice to it. The article says, unfortunately, however, while Braff does a good job of valorizing social and even cognitive difference, he's not so clear when it comes to portraying severe disabilities. Largeman's paraplegic mother, for example, is known by her absence. Only seen through the sentimental and politically correct eyes of others, she becomes a stereotype of suffering and pain whose life is portrayed as a mistake. I think death, in parentheses, is what she wanted, Largeman tells Sam at one point in the film. And as if to emphasize the point, he later tells his father that he thinks what his mother wanted more than anything was for it to all be over. This leaves open the question about what forms of difference are really acceptable. So, you know, I think it's important to kind of mention that because there's all the other problems in this movie get constantly brought up, but that's also not great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so it's a guy trying to write a movie that's serious in some ways, and the way he does that is through a paraplegic mother who probably kills herself because of it, and a girl whose future is like quote unquote ruined because of her epilepsy, which again isn't I'm gonna say this, which you get the impression that it's not actually going to affect their life together, even though epilepsy, like, we never see her have a seizure or anything. No. And I'm not saying we should. I don't think that's the point. But it is a kind of disability where he can give her this tragic backstory that allows his introduction to her life to be good for both of them. Because she is like quote unquote stunted and living home with her mom. And you get the impression she'd be doing that forever if she didn't meet him.
Which, on rewatching, honestly, I think her and her mom's like little cohabitation is delightful, and there's nothing wrong with it, and she should just stay there because it's expensive to be an adult and live in New Jersey. I clearly don't feel that way about Mark, but
Mark, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's fine though, because Andrew comes from so much money; they'll be fine.
Oh God. Yeah.
Is he gonna make her go to LA with him?
Or is he going to come home and like reconnect with his father and live in New Jersey and do what? I don't know.
Right. Because he's not a great, maybe he's a great actor. I don't know, but he's not super successful.
Right.
And who knows why he even wants to be an actor? Probably because he doesn't want to face who he is as a person. So he puts on all of these other.
Yeah, exactly.
So. I just hope whatever infection he has finally clears up.
I mean, he's on some pretty strong antibiotics.
Mm-hmm. Which might explain the meclizine, too, so.
Actually, yes.
Right.
Because Doxy makes you incredibly nauseous.
Totally.
Okay, that's really funny. Okay, wait.
God, I hope he didn't stop. I mean, he stopped taking everything. That includes, you can't just stop a round of antibiotics halfway through. That's the worst thing you can do.
Yes.
That's like the best way to build up resistance to an antibiotic. And one like doxycycline, there's not much you can do after that.
I mean, super bugs, man.
Totally.
I also, since we're in Ringer podcast parlance, we're picking nits right now. There is the student living with Tatembe living with...
who they adopted from Sally Struthers?
Yeah, there's that. I
don't even know what to do with that.
I don't either. Because it's not... Again, it doesn't fall fully into the stereotype of what you would expect to come from that. Like, he is at college at Rutgers and just is like, I'd rather live with family, and like, they take him in. It's not like they took in an orphan. Like, he's a college student doing just fine on his own. He just would rather live with them.
The thing that makes it... There are issues. The biggest one is the line that Natalie says where, like, you know, I mean, he's studying criminal justice at Rutgers, and when he was he was one of those babies with flies on his eyes.
Oh my God.
Which is just like, Jesus Christ.
Well, and so in the photojournalism world, there is a genre of journalism that is sort of pejoratively referred to as flies in the eyes photography.
Oh, whoa, yeah, exactly.
Which is like that sort of exploitive photography of poor children. So I wrote that down in all caps because I was like, that's actually a thing.
Yeah.
That is discussed.
I'm not surprised at all to hear that.
Yeah.
You know exactly what she means when she says it.
For a reason.
I do love the idea of the criminal justice major being obsessed with cracking cases in his own house, though. That's very funny.
It's very funny, especially because it's the dog
all over the screens. Exactly.
That he's profiling. Yeah.
Here's the most egregious thing in this movie is Zach Braff's portrayal of dogs. He is not a dog person at all. The pets in this, all of the pets in this movie except the cats are so gross. They're all ill-behaved, like, and there are a lot. There's the seeing eye dog who
Humps his leg, yeah.
Which, like you said, would never.
Never.
He never met a service dog. They're like...
Yeah, they're extremely well trained.
The whole point is for them to be well trained.
Their one job.
It would never happen in a million years.
They have one job, and it's not to leave their owner
exactly.
who is blind to go hump someone.
And then when he gets to what's-her-face's house, she's got
Dobermans.
Those poorly trained Dobermans,
mm-hmm.
which are big dogs. Like, you can't have a dog that big and not train it. And then they've got that little gross Chihuahua who's scratching itself at one point for no reason, which is like, also, that dog is trained, the actor dog is trained to do that, which is pretty impressive. But it's like, why is every...
And the hamsters.
And the hamsters, but the hamster is a victim. The dogs are all antagonists. And then
the hamster is a victim. Yeah.
And then there's the cats who are great, who are just hanging out. And he's actually holding one in Mark and his mom's house.
Yeah.
Zach and his mom are both peacefully cuddling with the cats while they're talking.
Very chill cats.
Yeah. So Zach Braff is a cat person, which I'm okay with. I'm both. I'm a cat person and a dog person. So but I did not like the way he portrayed dogs in this movie.
That's the biggest problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I understand.
What's the fucking deal, man?
I don't know. Not a dog person.
No.
So, okay. We talked a little bit about the general backlash to this movie. And I think that the discussion has been that, like, it's cliched and the portrayal of the manic pixie dream girl and all of that stuff. And the melodrama of it. He's very sincere. He's very, like, over the top. I wanted to mention an article that I thought was quite good, and it turns out was written by a writer that I already like. I love when that happens. This is from 2014, and it's by Jesse David Fox, who works for Vulture. And has a great, side note, great podcast called Good One, a podcast about jokes.
Love
where he interviews comedians about a specific joke of theirs and goes into incredible granular detail. But the article is called In Defense of Zach Braff's Garden State. And I thought he made a really good point as to one reason why the backlash was so harsh. Okay, so this was written in 2014, and he says, in 2013, he's referring to the previous year, we hate, or at least love to hate, sad 20-somethings. Have you ever read anything negative about girls? If so, you know what I'm talking about. If not, is this your first time on the internet? Welcome. There are a lot of smart opinions about girls here. He says, the crux of the hating is that youngish people who have grown up vaguely privileged and female shouldn't make art about their problems when there are bigger problems out there. Now, Braff and the character he created are not female, but he's something just as bad, not traditionally masculine.
Mm-hmm.
Garden State came out in a time of peak male sadness when a band like My Chemical Romance could go platinum. Over the last decade or so, however, culture has turned its back on dudes that just want to feel something. Don Draper, Ron Swanson, and the rise of hunks in TVs and movies, the Old Spice guy, we fetishize men who are quote-unquote men. So, and I could go on. It's like a really good, we should link to this.
Totally.
He says, and it comes from all sides, 30-somethings who look down upon their former wimpy naivete, manly men who never understood why men were quote-unquote acting like women in the first place, and effeminate men who respond to this masculinity shift by denying that part of themselves. So I think he makes a good point.
Totally.
That it's...
Yeah, because part of what we hate about this movie is the treatment of Natalie Portman and the Manic Pixie Dream Girl of it all. But another part, and you and I have said this, is the earnestness, is the scene where he puts his hand on his father's chest and says, like, you know, about, like, wanting to feel something. Like, that, watching it was, I'm hesitating to use the word cringe, but I was physically, like, cringing a little bit at that.
Yeah. And the most sincere parts are the hardest to watch. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And that's our problem. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl of it all is Zach's problem. And it's like film in general, it's their problem. But I think
is it the patriarchy?
It's the patriarchy, but like the resistance is also the patriarchy. To that sincerity that's something we need to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to read that because I think that Jesse David Fox is often smart about these things, but in this case, he's I like the fact that he points out that part of our resistance to it and part of our hatred is like a resistance to a man who is not performing traditional masculinity and is instead being sensitive and sincere and like so much so that it makes us cringe.
Right. Yeah.
And also pretty basic.
And also that. Yeah, I think that might be right. I think that's certainly part of it. I don't know that it's all of it, because I think
there's real problems with the movie,
but I do think that is
part of it. Yeah.
I have one thing I want to share from, I listened to it again. I'd already listened to it once, but Zach Braff's interview on with Pete Holmes on You Made It Weird. And it is so fun and lovely. It's like two people, he's done the podcast twice before, so they're already like sort of familiar with each other, but they just become like best friends over the course of this recording. They're having so much fun, and Zach is like being very open about what it's like to film with like Morgan Freeman, and he's just sharing so much, and also being like, it seems like very introspective and open about his own like just the way he thinks about the world and filmmaking, and it's very, and they're having a very good time. They do a lot of Al Pacino impressions. It's like it's all over the place, but it's great.
Yeah, well, that's that podcast in general.
Exactly. Yeah, and Zach Braff is just like really on board to kind of like play with Pete, and it's so fun.
That's when that one works the best.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But I listened to it because I was curious to see if he talked about Garden State at all. This is just from earlier this year. And they do a little bit, but the only thing that was new information for me was, I think my least favorite scene in the movie still, and I think I think it's a lot of kids. The one that's hardest to watch. It's one I couldn't watch it dead on. Yeah. I had one hand over one eye, and then my other eye kind of turned to the side, so I was only watching it out of my like not great peripheral vision. Is when, oh God, hold on. There's so many things happening right now, because it's right after she's done one of the stupid, she says like, we're not going to make out. I think they're in her bedroom, her childhood bedroom, which is the same since she was 12.
And then she's like all fussy and I ruined it.
I can't believe I did it. It's so stupid.
I'm such an idiot.
She jumps up and she makes him do the thing where she's like, make a sound or do something that no one has ever done. And she does.
I hate it so much.
Just this awkward, dumb little dancey thing. And then he does, because he's not as free as her, his own kind of like tightened up little version of it.
I fucking hate it.
It seems so contrived and so unreal, but guess what? Guess what? That comes from Zach Braff. That comes from real life Zach Braff.
So cringe.
That's a thing he would do for himself.
Yeah.
It's a thing he would do, and he wrote it into Natalie Portman's character, which is really interesting to think about, like who Zach Braff is picturing himself as in this movie.
Yeah.
And he has said, he's Andrew, and he wrote Natalie Portman's character to be who he would want to save him. I'll link, I think it's the Variety or Independent article where he talks about that.
The quote is, just to get it in here, he says, when quote unquote defending this movie in 2023, he says, I was just copying Diane Keaton and Annie Hall and Ruth Gordon and Harold and Maude. Those were my two favorite movies growing up, and I was taking those two female protagonists and melding them into Natalie Portman. Of course, I've heard and respect the criticism, but I was a very depressed young man who had this fantasy of a dream girl coming along and saving me from myself, and so I wrote that character. Yeah.
Which is so, like...
It's very honest.
It's so honest. It's not even really a defense. It just is what was happening.
Yep.
Like, which is fascinating, But that scene is just picture Zach Braff on a corner by himself, just
making a noise that no one's ever made before.
Yikes.
I think we all just hate how cringe we all are, and we're taking it out on Zach Braff.
I think so. I think that's a big part of this. I also was going to say, when I started getting ADHD overloaded, there was, she does that thing throughout the whole movie that I hate so much, of the, oh my God, remember, like, you can tell she's like quirky and weird because she talks like this all the time. But then he calls her out on it in that scene where he tells them all what happened and how his mom ended up in the wheelchair. Which that scene feels very real to me. That feels like being the last people up at a party.
Yes.
When everybody's like been drinking and is starting to sober up, like maybe a little bit, and it like they're kind of talking quietly, like that felt very real. And then, but he tells, and everybody gets a little, and he like throws it back at her. He's like, oh my God, you're totally freaking out right now. You want to leave, blah, blah, blah. And it's funny because it's like, okay, so you do know that that's not just cute and quirky. Like, you know that, but you did write that for her. Like, I just thought that was a really interesting little moment to include in that movie.
The other thing that I remember thinking as I was watching this last night was, and this is another thing that's very awkward to realize, but like people and maybe teenagers and young people still do this. I am fully not in that generation anymore, but like we used to like make out in front of each other.
Apparently at 26 years old on top of a bulldozer or whatever also.
But like the party scene was even with the spin the bottle. Like, ooh, first of all, ew. But
my hope is that scene is supposed to, them playing spin the bottle is supposed to imply that these are all
too young for him.
Too young for him. And also these are all people who have not really entered into adulthood when they should have maybe. Like, which is why one of the reason these older men are hanging out with these younger women is because they want to have sex with these younger women. But also part of it is that they're immature.
Yeah. Emotionally stunted.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting that bottle never once landed on two dudes. There's that scene where the two girls have to kiss, and isn't it cute? And they're like, ah!
Oh, it's so weird.
But, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's weird that isn't that interesting?
It's so strange. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I don't know how. I'm trying to figure out how much to divulge here, but like, that was a realistic scene in some ways. People just making out in front of each other.
If they were all actually high school seniors and or college freshmen, like that, I would have been saying like, oh, that party scene felt pretty real. Like,
yeah, exactly. And I don't know if that's still a thing, and I don't want to know.
Are house parties still a thing?
They
must be, right?
But I'm like wondering if if this generation, again, I really don't want to know, so please don't tell me, is more repressed in a way than we were in the 90s.
I mean, that's the story on the internet.
That's the story on the internet. Yeah.
Like,
that's what they're saying.
That's how they say, like, young people are reacting to sex scenes in movies and stuff, and that they're all having less sex in general. And I think some of that is probably true, and some of it is just us being old and not really knowing what young people are doing these days. So
right, which I'm happy to not at all know.
But they just ate all that X, so what else are they supposed to do? Another actor fighting for her life in this movie. Oh, the cop. We have to all of the cops in the movies we've watched so far. We've got another neighborhood cop, little overly familiar.
Probably shouldn't be a cop. Should not have grown up to be a cop. It's the fuck up to cop pipeline.
Exactly.
It's real.
But he does the fucking De Niro and shit, which is another one of those lines that just I forgot was in my head. It just, I think about that a lot, and I don't even think about where it comes from. Fucking De Niro and shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
He feels real.
Yes.
And he pulls the gun out. He's like, oh, they kind of have to listen to me because she's like, Jesus Christ.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's one of those little notes that's like, it feels like it came from reality.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I kind of wish I had more to say about this movie, but I feel like it hasn't given us.
Well, Jodie, we're at hour 39, and I don't know if you know this, but at hour 40, hour 41 tends to be where we just naturally go.
That's funny.
Weirdly, that just is where we tend to wrap up. But I do want to talk about the soundtrack a little bit.
Oh, God, yeah.
And then we can... and then you have to tell us what we're watching next week. I don't have a ton to say about the soundtrack because I think it's the most discussed thing about this movie at this point.
Yes.
It really did usher in a era of insufferable men listening to indie music and thinking they invented the genre.
Yes.
Which I know is, and that scene of It'll Change Your Life, and it's 5 seconds of one song.
Yep.
But it is a fantastic soundtrack. It still holds up. It's still great.
I also feel like what I realized while watching it this time was that soundtrack is doing so much heavy lifting in this movie.
All of the emotional beats are tied to these songs. Totally.
And like, I know that's a cliche to say that like without this soundtrack, the movie isn't the same.
It's almost like
it's almost like it's a character in the movie. Yes. Agreed. But I realized that because this movie leans so heavily into so many cliches and is clearly written by a early 20s guy who hasn't had a lot of life experience, the soundtrack is adding so much emotional texture and so much subtlety that is not in the writing.
Yeah.
Like the subtlety of the music that he chose is so much more does so much more for the like tone of the movie than the writing itself.
Well, I had totally forgotten that airport scene. I thought that airport scene was he gives her that terrible speech at the beginning of that scene, gets on the plane. Ellipsis. It's an ellipsis. And then I thought what happened was he got off of that plane, ran to her and kissed her with Frou Frou playing over top. But no. But it's because that song is so iconic and does the thing. You don't need that speech because you've got that song.
Also, like that's not a good speech.
Right. It's not a good speech. Yeah. All you need is that song because that song is doing everything you need.
Yeah. It's so much more like, it is such a cliche to say that about the soundtrack, but also it is doing so much for that movie.
Well, and he knew it because the story is that anybody he sent that script to, it came with that playlist.
Right.
Because he knew how tied up in the movie that soundtrack is. That fucking Iron and Wine cover had us all in a chokehold.
Oh, totally.
Just like, and I love the Postal Service so much, and I do think the original, that's one where the original is better. I think there are people who disagree, but it's so necessary. It's like so necessary in this movie. It's hard to think of this movie without it.
I just have to read. I have the script. I just have to read that last bit.
Oh no!
I know. I'm so sorry, but because I've been trying to remember what he said. And I can't because it's so generic. He says, remember that idea I had about growing and working stuff out on my own and then finding you and
the ellipses?
Yeah, the ellipses? Yes. Yeah, the ellipses. It's dumb. It's an awful idea and I'm not going to do it because like you said, this is it. This is life and I'm in love with you, Samantha. I think that's the only thing I've ever been really sure of in my whole life. I'm really fucked up right now, but I don't want to waste any more of my life without you in it, okay? She says, yeah. Because I think I can do this. I know I can. I want to. We have to. Yeah? Yeah. Yes. Tears stream down her face. She smiles her angelic smile. Yes. Yes? He says, yes. You know what she says in that whole scene? What are you doing? The ellipses. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
She said, yes, I will. Yes, I will. Yes. It's James Joyce. But so that's what that is. That's actually
so much classier.
It's actually a literary allusion to Ulysses. Oh boy, that's an argument. There's an argument to make.
Oh boy.
There's an argument to make. Nobody make that argument, but oh boy, are my wheels turning.
Yeah.
And
are you gonna write a paper about it?
It's you're a bully. Write a paper about this geek. It's write a poem about this geek. It's 13 going on 30.
Are you making a movie reference in reference to your literary reference in reference to your movie reference?
Welcome to the Watchers. Andrea. Welcome to my brain.
Yeah.
It's a never been kissed reference. Write a poem about this geek. Anyway.
Oh my god.
But you don't need any of that. Run off the plane, kiss the girl, let Frou Frou do it. It's weird. And I think that the reason I blocked it out is because the soundtrack is so effective and does that for you and then hides the flaw of using that speech at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Would love to see this movie cut to a different soundtrack.
Oh my god. Yeah. I can't imagine it. They're so tied together that it's just impossible for me.
Just like cut to like Lifetime. It's like Turnpike Gates is playing over their kiss. That would be That would be amazing. Just all Jersey bands.
Well, not as bad and also not as good as I remember.
Yeah, somehow better and worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think in general though we can let Garden State rest.
I think so.
I think we can be done.
Know, I don't think we need to. It's like going back to your college journals when you were writing about the first person that you fell in love with, and like just beating yourself up for being young and stupid.
Yeah. Also, something I didn't know that I read about a bunch in these articles, that if you look at what we link, you'll see too, is that his next movie he crowdfunded, and people hated him for that.
I know.
Like,
and yet he funded it in 3 days.
Yeah.
Like, it worked.
And it's because he's a rich actor, but it's like actors, it's not like other actors spend their, I mean, in some cases, sure. But in general, actors
don't fund their own movies.
They don't fund their own movies. It's not, and if people, like, I don't think, like, people treat crowdfunding like it's, like, if somebody who already has money does it, that it's a crime. And I just think, like, then don't donate. Who gives a shit?
Right.
Like, he's not saying...
I remember that backlash happening at the time.
It's not like he said, I'm going to lose my house if you don't crowdfund my movie. It's like, if you want to contribute to make this, then do it. And if not, don't. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
And I hate money. Like, I am one of the most, like, it makes my skin crawl in so many ways, but I don't care if somebody wants to ask people to, like, it'd be different if he were dishonest about it. So yeah, I just don't think crowdfunding is the issue that we're...
Yeah, I mean, if he couldn't find a studio to make the movie he wanted to make, like, he wrote it, he wanted to direct it, I guess, he wanted to be in it, because that's kind of his thing. Because it's, again, another movie about an actor that is struggling. Yeah, and people, don't have to donate.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a big deal, but apparently it was another thing that people have held against Zach Braff. I don't know.
I also just want to use this opportunity at the end of our podcast here to encourage any of our listeners who know Jeremy Jasper to get in touch. Get in touch. We still want to talk to him.
Or Zach Braff.
Yeah, although I think that's less likely.
Yeah, no. But yeah, would love to talk with Jeremy about patty cakes in New Jersey.
Yes. Speaking of New Jersey movies.
Totally.
Yes. I just want to talk to him about Route 46 for 45 minutes to an hour.
And then I probably would also ask one or two movies about the question.
Yeah.
Questions about the movie, but who knows?
So we need to what?
The WGA strike is tentatively or maybe at this point officially.
It's over.
Over.
It's over. And I actually, on one of my various social media doom scrolling things, saw an article that said it listed a couple of shows that were already back in the writer's room. And guess what one of them was? It was Yellow Jackets.
Hell yeah.
They're already
that's
starting.
So exciting.
They're doing it.
So that's great. We've got one more union. I'm sure across the country we've got a billion unions that aren't in entertainment that you should also be supporting, whatever. But in this case...
related to Yellow Jackets. We need the SAG-AFTRA strike to end also.
And it's a good sign that WGA has. So hopefully SAG will follow suit.
Yep. And support your local unions, people, because it worked.
Yeah.
They got some really good and really important concessions in
that
deal.
All of the stuff I was reading about AI is pretty aggressive in a good way. I was really and from an outsider's perspective who's most nervous about that, was really happy to see.
And script fees and minimum staffing and all of that stuff. Like all the things people were like, you're asking for too much.
Streaming residuals.
Yes, they got what they asked for mostly. Yep. Like I'm so happy.
Right, because what they were asking for was really reasonable, actually.
Yeah. I'm so happy that it ended the way that it did and they got the concessions that they were looking for the most part. So yeah, hopefully the SAG-AFTRA strike will end soon and we can get our buddies.
So exciting to know that they're writing.
Our Yellow Jackets back.
Because, I mean, that's the first step. Because we can have actors able to work, but if they don't have stuff to do. So I'm very, very, very excited.
Yeah, that was a happy news item this week. So
I wonder if that means we'll get our Cabin Daddy episode at some point soon because they can start
talking
about the show again. I mean,
yeah. No, that's a good point.
To a degree, anyway.
That would be fun.
It would be a nice little celebration.
Yeah. Little treat for the fans.
All right. And just remember the second that episode airs the next week, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. We're talking about it. Okay, so it sounds like, based on our little off mic convo, our little sidebar.
Yeah, I think we've decided on our sort of like theme for October.
Yes.
Which isn't horror movies necessarily, but it's
right.
thematically appropriate for the month of October movies.
I think that's a good way to frame it.
Okay.
Yep. So
I'm excited. We've got a good run. I'm really excited.
I know. So just a little peek behind the curtain. I am currently out of town at an artist residency. And I met a writer here who I had a lovely conversation with about our podcast. And he said to me, "Have you done the craft yet?" And I said no. And so Patrick, if you are listening, which I'm sure you're not, but if you are, hi. It was nice to meet you. You're a great writer.
And Patrick, I didn't meet you, but thank you so much for suggesting this.
Yeah. Actually, amazing queer writer that we should shout out because I loved listening to him read. His name is Patrick Dundon, Dundon. Great queer writer. Did a lovely reading at the residency that I'm at and made me want to read everything he's ever written. But asked the pivotal question, have you done the craft yet? So we're doing the craft.
Hell yeah. Oh, I'm so excited.
As we're recording this, it's October today.
Yeah.
Shit, I gotta pay my rent. I gotta pay my studio rent. So yeah, we're jumping into October with the craft.
Favorite month. I'm so excited.
It's my birthday month.
That's why it's my favorite month.
Yeah, I figured.
We're entering the part of the year where I start to feel like a human being who lives in a world that was built for her to exist in. I'm so excited. Goodbye summer, hello fall, hello all of my favorite movies.
Where do we find the craft? Is it easily accessible? Oh yeah, it's $3.99 on various platforms.
Perfect.
And also for free on Hulu.
Oh.
If you have Hulu, which I have.
Yep.
Cool.
And if you've never seen The Craft, there's plenty of 90s disclaimers.
Oh yeah, always.
So just be prepared for there's some overt racism. There's some self-harm stuff. It's
a very white lady 90s movie.
It's extremely, white ladies 90s movies. And of course, it's been a long time since either of us have seen this movie, but I'll put any like really necessary content warnings in the show notes when the episode goes up, so have a look at those before you listen if you're not familiar with it. It's also a little spooky.
It is a little spooky.
Oh, it's so good. Oh, I'm so excited.
I'm glad that you were in for it.
Hell yeah.
Or up for it. Or
I'm in for it and I'm up for it.
And up for it.
I'm down for it.
Wow, it only has 57% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Is this going to be an Empire Records scenario?
No, because I think that's a sexism thing.
Okay.
Also, recently an article came out that talked about the scam that is Rotten Tomatoes. So,
oh, good to know.
Yeah, apparently there's a lot of sort of like selective reviewing going on.
Interesting.
And people like encouraging certain people to review certain movies before they've come out so that because they know they'll get a favorable review and it will push the narrative about that movie.
Oh, you know what? There was just something, one of the podcasts I work on, Brain Candy, we're just talking about something similar with just like reviews in general, like Amazon reviews, which we know are a scam. But just that, like, basically just ignore online ratings if you can.
Yeah.
So that sounds
I think that's
like
fair. Yeah.
Just listen to us. And we say The Craft is good, I think.
Yeah.
So
we think. I haven't seen it in 10 years at least.
I'm so excited. I'm going to go watch it right now. No, I'm not. I have my other
You're
job.
Definitely not. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not either. I'm going to go do some work. But
I can't wait to.
Yeah. Gonna watch The Craft. So where can they find us, Andrea?
Oh, they can find us at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram, WatchersPodNJ@gmail. If you want to send us an email about anything, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you can leave reviews. So I think that's really the only one. If you happen to listen to us on Google Podcasts, apparently that's going away. I'm sure you've heard that already, though. So you might want to find another podcast app people really like Pocket Casts. And Apple girly, so I use just the regular.
I use
Apple
something
Podcasts.
called Downcast. Yeah,
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, I don't know. It was one that somebody recommended to me like a decade ago or something. I've been using it ever since. It's fine.
Interesting.
It's fine. But yeah, so leaving us a review really helps.
Yeah.
Also, if you follow our Instagram, Andrea posts really amusing reels. This week, you can see me sort of
that one,
like a fucking lunatic pointing at a photograph behind me talking about the Saddlebrook Mall.
Less of my art in this reel than usual, but more of yours, I'll say. So, I meant that as a joke because it's a performance piece, but also it's literally your photography.
My photograph in the background.
Your little art.
Yeah.
And if listeners want to see more of your art, where might they find it?
Oh my goodness. They can follow my Instagram, nicely done, at Jodie Mim on Instagram, JODIE _MIM. Yeah, I currently have been posting lots of photographs that I took in the mid-90s and early 2000s. So just the right vibe.
I always talk about how much I love your fiber art, but you're also a really incredible photographer. And it's actually how we really first got to know you through New Jersey is the World.
Yeah, the Overbrook photos.
Yeah. So
that was an early episode of New Jersey's a World called The Bin, where they talked about Overbrook, which was a psych hospital in disrepair that lots of people broke into and graffitied all over in the 90s, that I went to when I was in undergrad and took a bunch of photos and sent them in.
My first contribution was also a series of photos, but just ones that I snapped with my phone and weren't nearly as artful. But were of the Clementon Park, which has since been reopened, but was abandoned at the time.
We love our abandoned shit.
We really do here in New Jersey. In New Jersey, neither of us are in New Jersey
right now.
Neither of us
are currently in New
Jersey. But we're always in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So when I say here, it's like, that idea that you eventually outgrow your idea of home and you can't go back to it is not true if you keep New Jersey in your heart. New Jersey is the world. Just a thought I just had right now.
Jeremy Jasper, come on our podcast.
That's our new sign off, is just Jeremy Jasper.
Come on our podcast. Yes. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Jeremy Jasper, come on our podcast.